KWTR.
Hello po mga kababayan, kumusta na po kayo? Welcome po sa ating YouTube channel, KWTR Kwentuhan with Tata. Sabay-sabay po nating panoorin ang video ng isang interview ng batang BongBong Marcos. Ito po ay mula sa private collection of videos ni Colonel Arturo Arruiza. At from time to time ay magbibigay po tayo ng reaksyon. Simulan po natin.
Okay. How is the family taking the events of your father's delicate and often critical condition?
Well, as anyone who's been through it, who's had an extended sickness in the family would probably understand. It's quite nerve-wracking. It's an emotional roller coaster. But as we are all wont to do, we get more and more used to it. I suppose we're handling it better now than we were before. It's never easy. But we're still here.
Well, what can you say about your father's steadfast decision to return to the Philippines, given his present health condition and the persistent rejection of all your appeals by the Cory government? Do you still think it is a good decision?
Oh yes, certainly. There are no good reasons for us to stay here. The very basic fundamental question is whether or not we belong here. We do not. Home is in the Philippines, not here. Secondly, we have been accused of all kinds of terrible crimes. And we have been accused of all kinds of terrible misbehavior. And the place to answer that is in front of the Filipino people, not in front of the American media, not in front of the American public, not in front of the American political system, but in the Philippines. And certainly it was a good decision. As a matter of fact, I don't even think there was a decision that had to be made. It was almost a given.
Mm-hmm. If you were your father, would your decision be exactly the same, or would you do certain things differently?
Certainly the question as to whether or not one should return home is not really a question any longer. To go home, certainly, yes. To do things differently, who knows? It's very hard to say. I wouldn't be one to second guess him, but perhaps we see things in a different light now than we did 3 years ago.
Katulad ng nalalaman nating lahat, sa panahong ito ay nasa Hawaii na sila at buhay pa ang dating Pangulong Marcos. Tinatanong si BongBong kung ano ang kanyang masasabi sa matatag na kapasyahan ng kanyang ama na bumalik ng Pilipinas. Bagaman hindi na mabuti ang kalagayan ng dating Pangulo. At idagdag pa yung patuloy na pagtanggi ng Cory government na makabalik sila dito sa ating bansa. Ang sagot ni BBM, iyon ay magandang desisyon. At wala namang magandang dahilan para manatili sila sa Hawaii. Ang tahanan nila ay narito sa Pilipinas at ang mga krimen at iba pang masasamang bagay na ibinibintang sa kanila ay dapat nilang sagutin hindi sa harapan ng mga Amerikano at ng American media, kundi sa harapan ng mga Pilipino. Alam nyo, this is one topic I've been wanting to discuss. May mga sumusubaybay sa ating vlog ng mga anti-Marcos. Pag-isipan po ninyo ito. Pangkaraniwan na hinahabol natin ang mga gumagawa ng krimen. Uulitin ko lang, hinahabol po natin. Yung simpleng agaw cellphone, o kaya yung mga snatcher, Kapag inabutan niya ng taong bayan, bugbog sarado eh. Bagaman hindi tama yun na mangyari. Pero ginagawa natin yun. We use all the resources of the government to go after the criminals and bring them to justice. It doesn't matter how petty or serious the crime committed. Justice has to be served. The Cory government accused former President Marcos of plundering the coffers of the Philippine government billions of pesos. And yet, ang mga Marcos pa ang nakikiusap na makabalik sila sa Pilipinas. Nakikiusap sila na harapin dito ang mga akusasyon laban sa kanila. Ganito ba yung mga kriminal? Sila yung nagpipilit na harapin ng mga kaso dito sa ating bansa. At yun namang nag-aakusa, sigaw ng sigaw na magnanakaw, ayaw silang pauwiin. Nandito pa nga yung isang video sa YouTube ng matandang Marcos eh. Nakikiusap, nangangako na kikilalanin ang gobyerno ng Cory. Payagan lang siya makauwi para naman maihatid niya sa huling hantungan ang kanyang ina na noon ay namayapa na. Pero nabaliwala lahat ng pakiusap. All their pleadings fell on deaf ears. Ituloy po natin ang video.
Has the family discussed any plans in the event of the inevitable happening, God forbid, to your father?
Oh, certainly, yes. Of course, all the practical considerations have been discussed, and all the practical plans as to the disposition of there's no other way to put it, the disposition of the family certainly have been discussed, and I suppose we have a pretty good idea what to do. But this is the whole problem. The powers that be in the United States will determine what we can and cannot do. And although we may want to do certain things, we may not be allowed to do so. I mean, just as an example, my parents are not allowed to leave the island of Oahu, which is not up to us. It's no decision of ours. It's the American government doing what they feel the Philippine government wants them to do. And so long as we stay here, those sort of constraints will continue. And which brings us back to the reason why we must go home.
Tinanong si BBM kung napag-usapan na ba at may nabuo na bang plano ang kanilang pamilya kung dumating na nga ang araw na pumanaw ang kanyang ama. Ang sabi niya ay alam naman daw nila kung anong kanilang gagawin. Pero ang problema, ang may kapangyarihan sa Amerika ang magsasabi kung ano ang pwede at hindi nila pwedeng gawin. Ang isang halimbawa na binigay niya, ang kanyang mga magulang ay hindi pinapayagan na umalis sa isla ng Oahu. Ang gobyerno ng Amerika ang nagpapasya at ginagawa nito kung ano ang sa palagay nila ay gusto ng gobyerno ng Pilipinas. So consistent sila sa kanilang sinasabi. Kinidnap sila ng mga Amerikano kasapakat ang gobyerno ni Cory. Ituloy po natin yung video.
As the only Marcos son and as the man bearing the name Ferdinand Marcos, do you think of pursuing your political career and taking up the cudgels for the Filipino people where your father has left off?
Well, you know, the only way I can answer that question is really to give you a general idea of where my priorities lie. As I mentioned before, obviously there have been many accusations leveled against the family, and all those have to be answered. Secondly, the family cannot be allowed to just exist or just survive within the political milieu in the Philippines. There must be an element of self-determination in terms of our lives. And certainly we will work towards that, i.e. the legal questions must be resolved. The legal accusations must be answered. We must be able to live a life that is dignified and honorable. And it's a simple wish, but it seems to be something that they're not willing to give us, and therefore I will do everything I can to achieve that. As to a political career, well, it would seem that most of the time one finds oneself in a political career because of something that one believes in. Considering what has happened in the last 3 years, it would seem that is the sort of direction that one would inevitably take. I would certainly champion any cause that would try and right any injustice in the Philippines. If there's one thing the old man has instilled, I think, in all of us children, is a great nationalism and a great desire for equality and egalitarianism in the country. And should anything stand in the way of that, I will certainly work against it. If that takes a political identity, then so be it. I think that's actually getting ahead of ourselves, because simply the problems of the family are enormous and must be reckoned with before any of this sort of thing can be dealt with. As usual, when it comes to question of political career and things like that, it's really not for one to decide. It's not for me, it's not for you to decide. If the people ask you, then you must go, you must serve. If they do not, then you can't. And that's generally how that will be determined.
Ito yung magandang tanong sa kanya, no? Bilang nag-iisang anak na lalaki at taglay pa nga niya ang pangalan ng kanyang ama, ipagpapatuloy ba daw niya ang kanyang karir sa politika? Dito makikita natin yung maturity ni BongBong. Hindi siya padalos-dalos sa pagsagot. Masaklap yung nangyari sa kanilang buong pamilya, pero hindi siya rattled. Systematic at logical siya mag-isip. Alam niya ang kanyang mga priorities, at ang kanyang top priority ay sagutin o harapin lahat ng akusasyon at mga usaping legal na ibinabato sa kanilang pamilya. Gusto niya na makapamuhay sila na may dignidad at may dangal. At iyan ang kanyang pagsisikapan na makamit. Ito pa maganda. Ang sabi niya, ang politika daw ay isang direksyon na hindi maiiwasang tahakin kung ito ang ipapasya ng mga tao. Well, obviously, nagpasya nga ang majority ng mga mamamayang Pilipino. Kaya ngayon siya ay President-elect BBM. Tuloy po natin ang video.
Very well put. Your father firmly believed in the American commitment to freedom, justice, equality, and human rights. Most of all, as he said to the U.S. Congress in his speech before the joint houses in 1971, he believed that the United States would never betray a friend. Do you still share your father's faith in the United States after all that has happened?
Yes. I certainly believe that the United States of America still stands for something. And we stand for that. And we are therefore wedded together in our beliefs. I think that what happened in '86 was a failure of the American system. I think there were personalities or cliques within the system that decided at some point to put us away. I sincerely believe this was a mistake for the Philippines and for the United States. I think that events since then are beginning to show that that is so. The plight of the average Filipino has worsened. Pag-usapan na lang natin ang gulunggong kung gusto mo.
Nadinig niyo ba yon? Ang sabi ni Bongbong, pag-usapan na lang natin ang galunggong kung gusto mo. Para doon sa mga kabataan na hindi naman alam ang kwento ng galunggong, bakit nabanggit ito ni BBM, isa kasi ito sa mga ginamit ng kampo ni Cory Aquino para tuligsain ang gobyerno ni dating Pangulong Marcos. Natatandaan nito ng mga kaidaran ko eh. Ito yung isda kasi na abot kaya ng mga karaniwan ang buhay, ano? Noong mga panahon na yun, ngayon grabe ang presyo ng galunggong eh. Parang pangmayaman na lang yata yan eh. Pero pinatunog nila Cory na mahal at mataas na ang presyo nito at nahihirapan na makabili ang mga tao. Ang diferensya, nang maupo si Cory, nagmahal lalo yung galunggong. At walang ginawa o walang nagawa ang tita Cory nila. Kaya itong si BBM ay parang nagbibiro. At pati na ang karahasan, alam nila, minsan pag-uusapan natin yan, alam nila na lalong lumubha sa panahon ni Cory Aquino. Sa mga susunod na video, talakayin natin yan. Tuloy natin yung ating video.
And the Americans and the specific interest of the bases, the American bases in the United States, their hold on that has become more tenuous in the last 3 years. And therefore, for the Philippines and for the United States, and I dare say for the Southeast Asian countries for whom democracy is important, for them all, I think this has been a mistake. Now, this is not to say that America has turned on us. Perhaps the powers that be did what they believed was the right thing, having been told what they were told, which unfortunately wasn't true. I just hope that they will realize what is truly going on back home. What you and I know, what the country knows, what the average Filipino knows. Life is harder. People are going hungry. The communist insurgency grows worse by the day, no matter what they say. Peace and order in the cities, in the countryside, is getting worse. And no matter how you put it, no matter what ideological buzzwords you care to bring up, that in the end is the measure of the success or failure of your program. And having said that, I will not sit here and tell you how life is in the Philippines. I haven't been there in 3 years. I will ask you, how has it been? in the last 3 years? Has it succeeded? Has it failed?
Okay. Can you tell us, therefore, how you feel about the Filipino people in general now, 3 years after EDSA?
No different. I do not believe that what happened at EDSA was, I think it was a terribly well organized. I mean, it was very well done, very well organized. I'm sure there was a core group in that who believed. There were mistakes in my father's administration, for which I'm sure people were hurt. But I do not think, and I didn't think then and do not think now, that that was representative of the majority of the 54 million then Filipinos. I still don't think so. First of all, there was no revolution. I never saw a revolution. We left because we did not want to kill fellow Filipinos. We left the palace to go to Ilocos. We were tricked into coming to Hawaii.
Ito ang isa sa mga importante na dapat nating malaman, ano? Lalo na ng mga kabataan. Pinili ng mga Marcoses na umalis, iwan ng Malacanang dahil ayaw nilang kumitil ng buhay ng kapwa Pilipino. Ngayon, ang akala nila sa pag-alis nila ng Malacanang, papunta sila ng Ilocos. Wala talaga silang kamalay-malay. Wala silang kaalam-alam na dadalhin sila sa Hawaii. Isipin nyo, yung presidente ng Pilipinas na inihalal ng taong bayan kasama ang kanyang pamilya ay tinangay ng mga Amerikano. Kasabwat ang ilan nating mga kababayan. Hindi ba napakalaking krimen ito? Ituloy po natin ang ating panonood.
And I don't see in that a revolution. I cannot see how that constitutes a revolution. I cannot see, you see, it's impossible for me to differentiate how do I feel about the Philippines. How do I feel about myself? I'm one of the Filipinos. It's impossible for me to say, I think about Filipinos that way. I think about myself in a certain way. I think about them in the same way. I'm a Filipino. I love my country. I love the people more than I love my country more than any other place in the world. I've been everywhere. I love my people more than any other people in the world. Perhaps I'm prejudiced. Now, so be it. And no, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Not one tiny little bit. I can't see why it should. They haven't changed. I haven't changed. It's the same.
Walang bitterness na mababaka sa pagsasalita ni BBM. Despite all the things that had happened to their family, at nung panahon na yun, na ini-interview siya dito, kung baga nga sa sugat, sariwang-sariwa pa yung mga kaganapan sa buhay nila. At makikita natin sa video, bata-bata pa ni BBM dito eh. Pero nasabi niya na mahal niya ang mga Pilipino. Mahal niya ang kanyang bansa. At walang nagbabago doon. Tingnan niyo itong katatapos lang natin na eleksyon. Merong nag-post eh. Ang sabi sa post, ang hirap daw mahalin ng mga Pilipino. Yung iba naman, pag nanalo daw si BBM, lalaya sila sa Pilipinas. At may nagsabi pa nga eh, nakalimutan ko lang yung pangalan eh. Ikinahihiya na raw niya ang kanyang pagiging Pilipino. Isipin nyo itong mga taong to, natalo na, Natalo lang ang inyong kandidato kung ano-ano na lumalabas sa bibig nyo. Kung maka-arte kayo, akala nyo mahal na mahal yung Pilipinas kung meron siguro na dapat talikuran na ang pagiging Pilipino at sumpain na itong bayan natin, maka yung mga Marcos. Sa tindi ba naman ng ginawa sa kanila Si Madam Imelda, naku, grabe ang ginawang pag-aalipusta. Ayaw ko na lang banggitin dito Pero, may narinig ba tayong masamang salita mula kay Mrs. Marcos? Dito, kay bata-bata ni BBM nasabi niya na mahal niya ang Pilipino. Dahil ang sabi niya, yan kasi yung great nationalism na ipinunla, itinatak ng matandang Marcos sa kanilang magkakapatid. Medyo matabil-tabil na nga lang dyan si Senator Amy. Pero ano ba naman yung satirical skit na napaglilibangan niya? Saka yung medyo pang-aasar niya kay Karen Davila noong nakaraan. Pero other than that, wala tayong marinig na masasamang salita mula sa bibig ng mga Marcos. Kaya mapapaisip ko sino ba talaga ang mga salbahe? Kayong mga taong bayan, you be the judge. Kayo ang humatol. Ituloy po natin yung bandang hulihan ng video.
Is there anything you would like to say to address yourself directly to the Filipino people, perhaps in our own language?
Well, in spite of how far we are, nandito kami ngayon sa Honolulu, malayo-layo kami sa inyong lahat. Nalalaman namin at naririnig namin ang mga nangyayari sa ating bayan. Asahan ninyo na gagawin namin lahat ng kaya namin gawin upang kayo tulungan. But the Filipinos must come to a political maturity at this point in their history. Filipinos must understand that they must exercise their political will for what they believe to be right and what they believe to be just. We know the conditions that they find themselves in now. We know what life is like in the Philippines now. They know much better than we do. They must now exercise their political will, their political energy to make changes, to make their lives easier, better, and correct. And it's a turning point in the history of our country. It's a turning point in the maturity of political maturity of the general populace. And I think, knowing Filipinos as I do, that we will do the right thing.
Isipin niya, itong mga huling pananalita ni Bongbong. Ang panahon na yan, ang pamilya niya naka-exile. Pero ang nasa isip nila, tulungan ang bansang Pilipinas. Tulungan ang mga kababayan nilang Pilipino. Medyo talaga mapapaisip ko Kaya siguro maraming mga tao ang ngayon nabuksan na ang kaisipan dahil nakikita nila hindi maitatago yung pagmamalasakit ng mga Marcos dito sa ating bansa. Pero hanggang sa muli, ito po ang inyong Tata Ray. Pakisuportahan po ang ating channel. Please subscribe, like and share. Mag-ingat po tayong lahat.
KWTR